I bet this has your heart rate pumping, adrenaline flowing, veins pulsating, foaming out the mouth with your eyes glued to the screen. You just absolutely have to win this game of Tetris. You don't like that, do you? Me calling this game with two white shit characters from the 70s the wrong label makes you almost want to go out and commit a war crime on a school bus of furry toddlers, doesn't it? Or massacre your own bed sheets with your own excrement, or pee sitting down out of defiance. Video games, specifically video game violence, has been the blame for many real-life tragedies over these last years, and it's not completely far-fetched to blame a few sleepless nights or a handful of bad grades because you absolutely had to clear out an insane asylum from Nazi murderers and then go on to watch your own broadcasted execution, or maybe perform a few torture scenes of your own.
Not the jumpers! My heart! Don't do it!
Hell yeah, let me see those nipples, boy. Video games is a source of media that honestly is only going to continue to get more and more popular. Pandemic aside, by 2021, the gaming industry was projected to be worth $160 billion, with this last year being a little bit of a curveball and the revenue in the gaming industry completely skyrocketing, and the wave of newcomers to this form of media completely screwing over everyone else for new consoles and PC components. I'd argue this last year has only accelerated the growth of the entire industry, with everyone being stuck at home trying to find ways to not spend times with their loved ones and look for the most efficient way to just tune them out. Video games seem to be the best answer right now, and there's a reason why I bring all this up. With the influx of people who are unfamiliar with the unique perspectives video games can provide with storytelling and player freedom, there's undoubtedly bound to be a level of shock factor. Yeah, I'm right there with you. There's blood, gore, violence, and books, movies, TV, music. Every form of media has some form of violence. The difference here being is with a book, you have to imagine this. In a movie, you're shown. In music, you just hear it. In a video game, you're actually performing it. That is literally the only difference from one medium to the other. But what does that have to do with mislabeling Pong? You see, that was a social experiment. By my calculations, if video games really do incite violence in the real world, then the burning hatred that I conjured within you by mislabeling your favorite game from the 1970s would have caused you to go out and light the nearest orphanage on fire. But I'm gonna go out on a limb here and just assume that you probably didn't do that, like a normal fucking person wouldn't. So let's talk about violence in video games. Now this can be a pretty deep topic, and obviously I'm a little bit of a jokester, so I don't take anything I say too seriously. Last thing I need is you going out and committing any kind of atrocities on my account. Now we've already brought up the idea of violence and video games being a scapegoat for horrible things going on in the world and how violence in video games basically desensitize everyone, but for this video, I'm going to completely play devil's advocate. I, for one, revel in the violence and gore that video games showcase. I mean, who doesn't like a murderous rampage without real-life repercussions? It can be cathartic in some ways. Like, I can't be the only person that's ever loaded up GTA and just decided to drive on the sidewalk because I live in LA and fuck Los Angeles traffic. Or suicide bomb the gas tanks because for some reason gas is now $5 a gallon, or walk in and shoot the clerk. Because I actually don't have an answer to that. That sounds more like a problem for my therapist, but the point here being, there are scenarios that you can play out that can be a little stress relieving without there being any real life repercussions. That's basically how open world games deal with it, but let's talk about other games and how they handle that differently. I think it'd be incredibly blasphemous to not bring up one of the goriest games of all time, Mortal Kombat. The whole point of this game is all about flashy moves, graphical fidelity on character entrails is exactly what NetherRealm specialize in. And if you ever played any of these games, you got to experience what it's like to be a shark. Once you taste that very first drop of blood, you're always craving more and trying to push these characters to the limits. Obviously, Mortal Kombat isn't the only fighting game, but no fighting game does gore quite like this. Every character has their own specialized moves, with different attacks unique to their characters, their weapons, and going after different areas on their opponent's bodies.
Why haven't you conquered the Netherrealm?
I neither need nor want it.
The damned need leaders more than anyone.
Consider this fight putting the demon and demonetized, because holy fuck does YouTube hate this video game. But even with a game like Mortal Kombat, where the main point is really just the violence and gore and dominating your opponent physically in every possible way, there's more to it. There's a level of fantasy that you get to play out. You get to see what a real fight between Terminator and RoboCop would look like, especially when both of them are on a murderous rampage and they know that their lives are on the line. Even if you're not a fan of Mortal Kombat and the story and characters and lore there, fans of these two characters and their franchises have to have some type of interest in a matchup between these two, right? Or even going into Mortal Kombat. Going back to the classics of Scorpion versus Sub-Zero, whichever side you're leaning on, you can always make it where basically one or the other is always getting dominated by the other. You are in control of your own fantasy here, and because the game is so indulgent with its own mechanics and is self-aware of what it's trying to achieve, you can take whatever fantasy you want and push it to the absolute limits in the cruel and unrelenting world that is Mortal Kombat. But what about a game that has more to tell than just performing flawless mercy kills on your opponents? Say like Wolfenstein. I mean, yeah, if you want to get technical, then the whole point in this game is really just killing again. This time we're killing Nazis. That was a Nazi dog, and it provoked me. But something that I really love about these games is Machine Games' unwillingness to compromise. They set out to create a world dominated and run by Nazis, and they don't hold any punches. As I shown earlier, in the New Order, you see soldiers come in and start killing staff and killing mentally ill patients. You see decapitated heads kissing crotches, just like the president kisses babies' foreheads. I'm sure some video games show way more worse stuff than this, but the way the devs casually show the death of quote-unquote inferior races and the Nazis having complete lack of care for the loss of life, and KKK members roaming the streets with their German rulers who clearly hate the Native Americans' lack of eloquence with the German language. This oppressive racist world, coupled with hefty weapons that can very easily blow a guy's head off or disintegrate them into ashes, help tell an overall narrative of this world sucks balls. And I just shot that guy's leg off with a pistol, so weapons are definitely not the pea shooters of Fortnite. It's probably best to not get shot by anything. But all of this goes beyond just senseless violence. Now don't get me wrong, it's tons of fun to dual-wield semi-automatic shotguns and go around turning all of my opponents into all the various kinds of existing vegetative states and maybe even creating a few new ones along the way. Both the violent tendencies of this game's antagonists and the developer's unwavering commitment to show the more gruesome stuff, it helps motivate the player and even immerse them in a way that would have just left them resenting Machine Games or any other developer's decision to play it safe and censor that more draw-dropping or offensive type of content. There's even a moment in the new Colossus where they show a little bit of domestic violence, which helps, again, with that world building, because obviously social standards aren't the same these days as they were back then, but also it helps provide a little bit of background for the character that you're playing as, BJ Blazkowicz, and his relationship with his father. And you can gain a little bit of insights to how he feels when he finally gets that bittersweet moment where he ultimately ends up killing his father, which, as intense of a moment as this is, I would argue it would not hit the same if you didn't have the earlier moment where you've seen how his father treated him and his mother growing up, on top of him snitching out where BJ is and also turning over his wife over to the authorities because she's Jewish. And whether if you ever played this game or not, however you felt on the story, gunplay, or whatever it is, this has to be one of the best scenes I've ever experienced in a video game in a long time. This is a scene that stuck with me.
Run off to the army as soon as you come of age. Broke your mother's heart.
Where is she?
She's gone.
When? What happened?
What happened is we had a big goddamn war, and now we got a new government with new rules. They took her. She gone. And what's that queer outfit you're wearing?
What do you mean they took her?
They rounded up all the Jews and the coloreds and the queers. This is a white man's world now. White man's got to keep it Christian.
You sold her out.
So what? Wife made a living bemoaning me and raised a boy into a murderer. Well, I always saw you for what you are. 10 pounds of shit in a 5-pound bag. On your knees.
Daddy, I'm your son.
Down on your fucking knees.
Was it time I was scared of you? Was it time I'd have pissed myself, had a gun pointed at my head? You know what I feel right now? Not a goddamn thing.
Knowing that's probably the same shotgun that he forced you to use on your own dog adds a little bit more to that bittersweet death. So what did we learn here? Besides me admitting that I have a tendency to shoot clerks and dance on their body for no apparent reason, we've learned that gore in video games can help with world building, it can help add character depth, show that weapons are actually incredibly deadly instruments that can rip you apart limb from limb, and that there's some nice fan fiction that can be served. In other video games, it can be quite cathartic, and not everything tragic in the world has to be tied to video games, or video games having to be used as scapegoats. Anyways, I just wanted a small talk on, I guess, violence in video games. I was looking for a reason to create a very hard to monetize video, and this was my excuse. But obviously, there's a large plethora of video games to be talking about how gore and violence and blood is used. In part 2, we're going to be talking about why it's okay to kill newts or screamers in Days Gone and Dying Light, which, for those of you unfamiliar with those two games, those are actually zombified kids.